The alarm clock's red numbers glowed 5 o'clock a.m. when William Parker's eyes opened. 60 years of waking before dawn had carved this ritual into his bones deeper than any conscious thought. His arthritic right hand reached automatically for the lamp switch fingers, stiff from a lifetime of gripping machinery in the cold Indiana mornings. The pain was familiar, almost comforting in its consistency. It meant he was still here, still breathing, still fighting. The trailer park was silent except for the hum of a distant highway. Bill sat on the edge of his narrow bed joints, protesting, and stared at the pile of medical bills on the nightstand. Blood pressure medication, arthritis treatment, cholesterol pills. The monthly pharmaceutical parade that kept a 60-year-old body functional. Beside the bills lay a photograph in a tarnished frame. David Parker, his son wearing dress blues. Marines, 2008. The boy had come home from Iraq with demons no medication could touch. Bill pushed himself to standing, moving through the trailer's cramped kitchenette with the careful navigation of a man who had memorized every inch of limited space. The coffee maker gurgled to life. Through the thin window, he could see his grandson Charlie, asleep on the sofa bed, 12 years old, and too young to carry the weight already pressing on those narrow shoulders. The boy's homework was scattered across the fold-out table. Math problems, history essays, a future Bill was terrified he couldn't afford to secure. 2 years had passed since Bill found David in that bathroom. Blue lips, empty eyes, a needle on the tile floor. The paramedics had worked for 20 minutes, but fentanyl doesn't negotiate. Charlie had watched from the doorway, 10 years old, as they loaded his father into the ambulance. The boy hadn't cried. Not then, not at the funeral, not in the 2 years since. He'd simply gone quiet, like someone had reached inside and turned down the volume on his childhood. Social services had wanted to place Charlie in foster care. A 57-year-old retired machinist on a fixed income wasn't their ideal guardian. But Bill had fought. "He's my blood," he'd told the caseworker. "I'll manage." And he had managed, barely stretching every dollar until it screamed working part-time security at Walmart for $14 an hour, fixing neighbors' cars for $50 a job. Surviving but not living, existing in that gray space between hope and despair that defines American poverty. Bill's checking account balance set at $847. Rent was $750. Due 2 weeks ago, the landlord had been patient, but patience had limits. He poured his coffee into a chipped mug that read, "World's Best Dad, a Father's Day gift from David 20 years ago, back when the world still made sense." The pile of mail on the counter was mostly bills and donation requests, credit card offers for people who'd never qualify, grocery store circulars advertising sales he couldn't afford to take advantage of. But one envelope stood out, yellow with age, heavy paper, the kind nobody used anymore. The postmark read Millbrook, Indiana, but the date was impossible. November 15th, 1953. 71 years ago, the envelope had been forwarded multiple times. Bill could see the address labels stacked like archaeological layers. His father's old address in Gary, his grandmother's house in South Bend, the apartment Bill and Linda had shared when they were newlyweds. Each forwarding stamp represented another chapter of a family's migration through industrial decline. The Postal Service had been tracking this letter across 7 decades, waiting for the right William Parker to claim it. A red wax seal held the envelope closed. Not the cheap kind from craft stores, but real sealing wax impressed with a design. Bill held it under the kitchen light. A compass rose, 8 points, detailed enough that he could see the craftsmanship in the stamp. Someone had taken time with this. Someone had cared. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside the paper was thick, formal, the kind of stationery that announced importance. The handwriting was precise, each letter formed with the careful attention of a man who understood that words mattered. November 15th, 1953, it began, to the rightful heir of the Ashford line. Bill read it once quickly, his mind refusing to process the words. Then again slowly, letting each sentence sink in. Then a third time, because surely he was misunderstanding something fundamental. "I am Henry James Ashford, veteran of the European theater, recipient of the Silver Star, and a man who lost everything that mattered except honor. I have no children, at least none the law recognizes, but bloodlines run deeper than marriage certificates. I know there is a child born of love during wartime, a child raised by another man. A grandson I will never meet. Perhaps a great-grandson reading this now. Bill's coffee had gone cold in his hand. The words swam in front of his eyes, rearranging themselves into impossible genealogies. I leave you Ashford Manor in Millbrook. 3 stories, 17 rooms, 5 acres. The town calls it cursed. Let them. Curses are just truths people fear to speak. The property comes with 1 year's taxes paid and a challenge. Find what I hid. Prove you're worthy. The treasure isn't gold. It's justice 70 years delayed. The letter continued with instructions. Start with the compass, follow the stars, trust no sterling. It was signed with a flourish. Semper Fidelis Henry James Ashford, Corporal, 29th Infantry Division. Attached to the letter were legal documents. A deed transfer properly notarized transferring ownership of a property in Millbrook, Indiana to William Parker, great-grandson of Henry James Ashford. And there were photographs, black and white, showing a Victorian mansion that looked like it had been transported from a Gothic novel. 3 stories of ornate architecture surrounded by overgrown grounds. A genealogy chart with careful notations, and a smaller envelope with a warning written across the seal. Up and only at the manor. Bill sat at the table, the papers spread before him, trying to reconcile this impossible inheritance with everything he knew about his family. His father, Michael Parker, born 1947, a Korean War veteran who died of alcoholism in 1987 when Bill was just past his 22nd birthday. A man who'd worked 3 jobs and still died poor. A man who'd never mentioned any connection to wealthy relatives or Victorian mansions. His grandmother, the woman who'd raised Bill after his mother died in childbirth, had been tight-lipped about family history. The past is the past, she'd say whenever young Bill asked questions. No point digging up old graves. She'd died in 1989, taking whatever secrets she'd harbored to those graves she'd warned against disturbing. Bill opened his laptop, the screen's blue light harsh in the dim trailer. He typed Henry James Ashford into the search bar. The results populated slowly on his budget internet connection. A Wikipedia entry, some genealogy forums, a historical society article about Millbrook's industrial past. Henry Ashford had been real. Born 1922, enlisted 1943, served with the 29th Infantry Division, Normandy, Battle of the Bulge, awarded the Silver Star for Valor at St. Lo, returned home 1945 and partnered with another veteran, Robert Sterling, to found Ashford Sterling Manufacturing. The company had thrived through the late 1940s and early 1950s, producing industrial components for the post-war boom. Then in April 1953, Henry Ashford disappeared. No body was ever found. No explanation was ever given. The business partnership dissolved. Robert Sterling took control of the company's assets. Henry was declared legally dead in 1960. The Ashford Manor had sat empty ever since, tied up in a legal trust that specified it could only transfer to a direct blood descendant. Bill's search brought up one more crucial piece of information. Robert Sterling had been married to a woman named Eleanor. She died in a car accident in March 1953, just weeks before Henry disappeared. Robert himself had died in 1991, officially from liver failure. The coincidence of timing felt heavy, loaded with implications Bill wasn't ready to examine. A sound from the living area made him look up. Charlie stood in the doorway, hair messy from sleep, wearing the oversized t-shirt he used as pajamas. The boy's eyes were cautious, always watching, always assessing. 2 years of grief had made him old before his time. "Grandpa, what's wrong? You've got that look." Bill realized he'd been staring at the letter for who knows how long. "Come here, Charlie. I need to show you something." The boy crossed to the table, moving with that careful quietness he'd developed. Like if he made too much noise, the world might remember he existed and decide to hurt him again. He looked at the yellowed paper, at the photographs of the mansion, at the genealogy chart with its mysterious notations. "What is all this?" Bill took a breath. "I think we just inherited a house from a man who died before I was born. Your great-great-grandfather." Charlie picked up one of the photographs. The mansion looked like something from a movie. Towers and turrets, an elaborate Victorian gingerbread trim. "This is ours." According to these papers, yes. But Charlie, look at it. It's been abandoned for 70 years. It's probably falling apart. We'd need hundreds of thousands of dollars to make it livable. The boy's finger traced the outline of the tower in the photograph. But what if it's not just a house? This letter talks about finding something, about justice, about a treasure. That's probably just an old man dramatics. People didn't talk straight back then. They got poetic about everything. But even as Bill said it, he knew he didn't believe it. The letter was too specific, too carefully planned. Henry Ashford had left this inheritance for a reason, had structured it to arrive exactly 70 years after his disappearance. That kind of long game planning suggested something more than sentiment. Charlie read through the letter again, his young mind catching details Bill had missed. "Grandpa, look at this genealogy chart. It shows your dad, Michael Parker. But there's a note here." He pointed to a small notation beside Michael's name. It says, "E's child 1947. Who's E?" Bill leaned closer. The handwriting was tiny but precise. Other notes dotted the chart. "The truth, Robert Sterling, buried. Born of love, not law. Oh, my son, who will never know my name." "I don't understand," Charlie said. "If Henry Ashford is our great-great-grandfather, why didn't your dad know about him?" It was a good question. Bill studied the chart more carefully. Michael Parker, born 1947, listed as the son of Eleanor and Robert Sterling in public records. But Henry's private chart told a different story. The implications were staggering. "I think," Bill said slowly, "Henry Ashford might have had an affair with Eleanor Sterling, and my father might have been their son, raised by Robert Sterling as his own." Charlie's eyes widened. "That's like something from a movie." "Real life is messier than movies, buddy, and usually sadder." The boy fell silent, processing. Then he looked up with an expression Bill recognized. It was the same determined look David used to get when he decided on something. Stubborn Parker blood. "We have to go there, to the mansion. We have to find out what really happened." Bill wanted to argue. They couldn't afford a wild goose chase to some abandoned house 2 hours away. They had real problems. Overdue rent, upcoming bills, a 12-year-old who needed stability, not adventure. But when he looked at Charlie's face, he saw something he hadn't seen in 2 years. Interest. Engagement. A spark of the boy Charlie had been before David's death had extinguished something vital in him. "It's probably a waste of time," Bill said. "Probably," Charlie agreed. "The house is probably condemned, dangerous." "Probably, we'd be spending gas money we don't really have." "Yeah," Bill sighed. "We'll drive up Saturday, look around. If it's a complete disaster, we figure out how to sell it to whoever wants the land." "Deal." Charlie's smile was small but genuine. "Deal." The rest of the week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Bill worked his shifts at Walmart, standing for 8 hours in the security booth, his arthritic knees screaming by hour 6. He watched shoppers come and go, people buying things they didn't need with money. They didn't have the American retail dance playing out in fluorescent lighting and credit card swipes. Charlie went to school, came home, did homework. But Bill noticed the boy reading the letter over and over, studying the photographs like they held secret codes. He'd started a notebook writing down observations and questions. Where exactly were the vaults mentioned in the letter? What did "follow the stars" mean? Who was Robert Sterling, and why shouldn't they trust any Sterling? Friday evening, Bill's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, figured it was a debt collector or spam call. But something made him pick up. "Mr. Parker, William Parker." The voice was elderly female with the particular timbre of someone who'd lived through hard decades and come out tougher for it. Speaking. "My name is Margaret Hayes. I live in Millbrook, next to the Ashford property. I heard through the county clerk's office that the deed had finally transferred. I've been waiting 71 years for Henry's heir to come home." Bill sat down. "You knew Henry Ashford." "I knew him. I knew Eleanor. I know the whole terrible story. And Mr. Parker, you need to know something before you come here. Marcus Sterling is still alive. Robert's son. He's 65 years old and he's been waiting for you just as long as I have. But for very different reasons." "What reasons?" Margaret's voice lowered. "Henry hid evidence. Evidence that would destroy the Sterling family's reputation and possibly expose crimes that go back 80 years. Marcus has spent his entire life trying to find and destroy that evidence. If you come to Millbrook, if you start looking for what Henry left, Marcus will know, and he'll do whatever it takes to stop you." "Are you trying to scare me away?" No, I'm trying to prepare you. Henry was my brother's best friend, David Hayes. They served together. David didn't come home from the war. Henry spent the rest of his life trying to make sure David's sacrifice meant something. I made Henry a promise before he disappeared. I promised I'd help his heir when the time came. So I'm calling to tell you three things. Bill grabbed a pen. I'm listening. First, everything in that letter is true. Every word. Henry planned this for 70 years. He knew you'd come. Second, the evidence Henry hid is real and it's damning. Robert Sterling murdered Eleanor. Marcus has been covering it up his whole life, and he killed his own father to keep the secret buried. Third and most important, don't trust the authorities in Millbrook. Marcus has judges, police inspectors on his payroll. He's had decades to build his network. When you come ready to fight. Mrs. Hayes, I'm just a retired machinist with arthritis and a grandson to take care of. I'm not equipped to fight anybody. You're Henry's blood. That makes you stronger than you know. I'll see you when you arrive. Be careful, Mr. Parker. The Sterlings don't lose gracefully. She hung up before Bill could ask more questions. He sat staring at his phone, Margaret's warnings echoing in his mind. Charlie appeared in the doorway. Who was that? Someone who knew our great-great-grandfather. Someone who says this is more complicated than we thought. Is that going to stop us from going? Bill looked at his grandson. 12 years old, already acquainted with loss and disappointment, but still capable of hope, still willing to believe in mysteries and treasures, and justice delayed, but not denied. No, Bill said. We're still going, but we're going to be careful. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray. November in Indiana meant the death of autumn-winter not yet committed, but summer long gone. Bill loaded his pickup truck, the 2007 Ford, with 220,000 miles on it. He packed tools, flashlights, first aid kit, the habits of a practical man preparing for an impractical journey. Charlie brought his notebook, a camera borrowed from school, and a backpack full of snacks. The boy was vibrating with barely contained energy, the most animated Bill had seen him since David's funeral. They drove east on Route 37, leaving Indianapolis behind for the smaller roads that connected Indiana's dying industrial towns. The landscape was familiar in its decline. Closed factories with broken windows, gas stations that had become used car lots, diners with faded signs advertising breakfast specials from better decades. Charlie watched it all from the passenger seat, sketching in his notebook. It's sad, he said. All these towns look like they're waiting for something that's never coming back. That's exactly what they're doing, Bill said, waiting for the factories to reopen, for the wealth to return, for prosperity to trickle back down. But it doesn't work that way. Once a town dies, it stays dead. Is that what happened to Millbrook? Probably, we'll find out. The GPS took them off the highway onto county roads. The houses became sparser, the land more agricultural. Cornfields stretched to the horizon, harvested and dormant. Farmhouses sat back from the road, some maintained, some collapsing, slowly back into the earth. A green sign announced Millbrook. Population 1,847, down from 4,200 in its heyday, according to the faded historical marker. Main Street was a study in small-town decay. Half the storefronts were empty windows, papered over with outdated for lease signs. A hardware store hung on, a post office, a Baptist church with a sign proclaiming, God still loves Millbrook even if industry doesn't. One diner looked open, Betty's Place according to the neon sign. Bill pulled into the parking lot. Let's get directions and maybe some information. The diner's interior was aggressively 1970s. Orange vinyl booths, laminate tables, a jukebox in the corner that probably hadn't worked since Reagan was president. 3 customers sat at the counter, all men over 70, nursing coffee and arguing about local politics. The waitress was maybe 75, thin and sharp-eyed, moving with the efficient grace of someone who'd worked this room for decades. Her name tag read Betty. Help you, she asked, already holding a coffee pot. Coffee would be great, Bill said, and maybe some directions. We're looking for the Ashford Manor. Betty's hand paused mid-pour. The 3 men at the counter fell silent. The whole diner seemed to hold its breath. The Ashford place, Betty said carefully. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. What business you got there? I inherited it from Henry Ashford. Betty set the coffee pot down and really looked at Bill. Her eyes scanned his face, cataloging features, making connections. You related to Henry, his great-grandson, apparently. Well, I'll be damned. 70 years and the bloodline finally comes home. She turned to the men at the counter. Earl, you remember telling me your granddad worked at Ashford Sterling back in the day? One of the old men nodded. 40 years, right up until it all went to hell in 53. Betty poured Bill's coffee, then Charlie's orange wine juice. The Ashford place is east of town end of Elm Street. Big iron fence, you can't miss it. Been empty since before I was born. House is probably falling apart by now. Can you tell me anything about Henry Ashford? Betty exchanged glances with the old men. Some kind of silent conversation happened, the kind only possible between people who'd known each other for decades. Henry was before my time, Betty said, but my mother knew him. Said he was a good man. War hero, came back from France and tried to build something here. Partnered with Robert Sterling. For a while, things were good. Then Eleanor Sterling died, Henry disappeared, and the whole town sort of died with them. What happened to Eleanor? Car accident, brake failure on a mountain road. Or that's what the official report said. But my mother always thought it was suspicious. Eleanor's car was brand new. Brakes don't just fail on a new car. Charlie leaned forward. Did anyone investigate? Betty smiled sadly at the boy. Kid, this was 1953. Robert Sterling owned half the county. The sheriff worked for him, the coroner worked for him, and if Robert said it was an accident, it was an accident. Questions weren't healthy for people's employment prospects. And Henry Ashford disappeared right after, Bill asked. About 3 weeks later. Left everything behind. His house, his business, stake, everything. Some folks thought he ran off with embezzled money. Others thought he just couldn't live with the grief. Nobody knows for sure. But I can tell you this. Betty's voice dropped. You got his eyes, same color, same sadness in them. If you really are Henry's kin, you'll want to be careful. That house has secrets, and secrets in Millbrook have a way of being dangerous. Bill paid for the coffee and left a generous tip. As they walked back to the truck, Charlie said, She knows more than she's saying. Most people in small towns do, Bill replied. The question is whether they'll tell us or warn us away. Elm Street was on the east side of town where Millbrook gave way to countryside. The houses became larger, older, speaking of a time when mill owners and factory bosses built estates to showcase their success. Most of those estates were gone, now subdivided or torn down. But a few remained slowly decaying monuments to forgotten prosperity. The Ashford Manor sat at the end of the street, separated from its neighbors by overgrown hedges and a wrought iron fence that had surrendered to 70 years of rust. The gate hung crooked on broken hinges. A gravel drive, now more weeds than gravel, curved through 5 acres of wild land toward the house itself. Bill stopped the truck at the gate. Through the bare November trees, he could see the mansion. 3 stories of Victorian Gothic architecture, all towers and turrets, and elaborate gingerbread trim. The photographs hadn't done it justice. Even in decay, even with paint peeling in great sheets and windows boarded or broken, the house radiated a kind of terrible beauty. It's like a castle, Charlie whispered. It's like a money pit, Bill replied. But he was lying to himself. Despite the damage, despite the obvious cost of restoration, despite every practical concern, something in him responded to the sight of that house. It was his. It was family. It was a connection to a past he had never known he had. They drove through the broken gate tires, crunching on gravel and weeds. The drive curved past ancient oak trees, their branches bare against the gray sky. A fountain sat in the circular drive in front of the house, dry and cracked, filled with dead leaves and the ghosts of better days. Bill parked, and they both just sat for a moment, staring up at the building. The roof had partially collapsed on the north side. Most of the windows were boarded up, though a few on the upper floors still held glass, reflecting the cloudy sky like dead eyes. The porch sagged and the middle boards rotted through. Ivy had claimed the east wall, its bare winter vines creating patterns like veins on aging skin. We probably shouldn't go inside, Bill said. Structure looks unstable. Probably not, Charlie agreed, but they were both already unbuckling their seatbelts. The front door was massive oak, 8 feet tall, with an elaborate stained glass panel on either side. Bill tried the key that had come with the inheritance documents. It turned smoothly, the lock mechanism still functional after 7 decades. The door swung inward with a groan that seemed to echo through empty rooms. The entry hall took Bill's breath away. Even in decay, the craftsmanship was evident. A grand staircase curved upward, its walnut banister carved with intricate details. The floors were wide plank hardwood, warped and dull, but still showing hints of rich honey color beneath the dust. Crown molding ran along 14-foot ceilings. A crystal chandelier lay shattered on the floor, its prisms catching what little light filtered through boarded windows and scattering rainbow fragments across the walls. The smell was mold and dust and the particular scent of time passing undisturbed. But underneath, Bill could detect something else. Cedar, maybe. Old leather. The ghost of when this had been a home instead of a tomb. Charlie moved into the parlor, his footsteps leaving prints in the dust. "Grandpa, look at this." The room had been grand once. A marble fireplace dominated one wall. A piano, its wood warped and strings broken, sat in one corner. Furniture remained draped in white sheets, now gray with age. And on the walls, photographs in ornate frames. Bill moved closer to study them. Military photos. Young men in World War II uniforms, serious faces staring into the camera with the particular intensity of people who knew they might not survive long enough to see the developed prints. One photo showed a group of 12 soldiers. Bill recognized the 29th Infantry Division patch. And in the front row, third from the left, a young man who could have been Bill's reflection. Same jawline, same deep-set eyes, same slight asymmetry to the nose. Henry James Ashford, at 22 before the war, took whatever optimism he'd possessed. "That's him," Charlie said. "That's our great-great-grandfather." Bill touched the glass connecting across 7 decades to a man he'd never known, but who'd planned for this exact moment. Henry staring out from 1944, somehow knowing that his great-grandson would stand here in 2024, would see this photograph, would begin to understand the weight of inherited secrets. They explored the first floor, carefully testing boards before trusting them with weight. The dining room held a table that could seat 12, its mahogany surface still gleaming under the dust. The kitchen was a museum-piece, 1940s appliances, standing like monuments to domestic life as it once was. Built-in hutches and pantries spoke of an era when families cooked elaborate meals from scratch. But it was the library that stopped Bill cold. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls. The books were mostly ruined by moisture and mold, but some remained salvageable. Military history, engineering texts, and unexpectedly poetry. Byron Shelley Keats. Someone in this house had possessed a romantic soul alongside practical skills. A desk sat beneath the window mahogany with a locked drawer. Charlie tried it. Locked. "We'll come back to that," Bill said. On the wall opposite the bookshelves hung a portrait. A woman painted in the style of the 1940s. She was beautiful in a way that transcended mere physical attractiveness. Intelligence shone in her eyes. Sadness pulled at the corners of her mouth. She wore a simple dress, her auburn hair pulled back, her hands folded in her lap. A small brass plate on the frame read, "Eleanor 1945. Bill stared at the painting. This was the woman who died in a car accident. The woman married to Robert Sterling. The woman who had allegedly had an affair with Henry Ashford. The woman who might have been his grandmother. "She looks sad," Charlie observed. "Like she's sorry about something. Or like she knows what's coming," Bill said. A sound from outside made them both freeze. Car doors slamming, footsteps on the porch. Bill moved to the window and carefully peered out through a gap in the boards. A black Mercedes sedan sat in the circular drive. Expensive. New. Completely out of place in this landscape of decay. A man stood on the porch, well-dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Bill made in a month. The man knocked, not frantically, not urgently, just 3 measured raps that somehow conveyed absolute confidence. Bill looked at Charlie. "Stay behind me." He opened the door. The man on the porch was 65 or so tall, with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in the military. Gray hair cut short, cold eyes that assessed Bill with the clinical efficiency of a predator evaluating prey. A scar ran down his left cheek, old and white. His suit was impeccable, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. "Mr. Parker," the man said, "I'm Marcus Sterling. I believe we need to talk." Marcus Sterling stood in the doorway of the Ashford Manor like a man who'd finally cornered prey that had eluded him for decades. His gray suit was immaculate despite the November cold, his posture military straight, that scar on his left cheek catching the afternoon light. Bill had seen men like this before. Vietnam vets who'd come home with something fundamental broken inside, who'd learned that violence was a tool and morality was negotiable. "Mr. Parker," Marcus said again, his voice carrying the particular softness of truly dangerous men. "I realize this is unexpected, but I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." Bill kept his body between Marcus and the interior of the house where Charlie waited. Every instinct, honed by 60 years of working-class survival, screamed danger. "Margaret Hayes called me. She warned me you'd be coming." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure she did. Millbrook has long memories and old grudges. May I come in? I promise I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here with a business proposition. We can talk on the porch." "Fair enough." Marcus gestured to the rotting boards. "Though I'm not sure this structure is safe even for that. This house has been condemned 3 times in the past 20 years. Only the legal trust kept it from being demolished." Bill stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. Through the wavy glass of the sidelights, he could see Charlie's silhouette, the boy watching and waiting. "What do you want, Mr. Sterling?" Marcus pulled a leather briefcase from his Mercedes, setting it on the porch railing. "I'll be direct because I respect directness. This house contains documents that belong to my family. Henry Ashford embezzled approximately $50 million from the Ashford-Sterling partnership between 1946 and 1953. He hid evidence of his theft somewhere in this structure. My father spent his life trying to recover what was stolen. I've continued that search." He opened the briefcase, removing a cashier's check. $2 million made out to William Parker. The number was so large it seemed abstract, meaningless. More money than Bill had earned in his entire working life. "This is more than fair market value for a condemned property," Marcus continued. "It's enough to secure your grandson's future. College, graduate school, a trust fund that would last generations. All I ask in return is clear title to this property and the right to search it thoroughly." Bill looked at the check, then at Marcus. "Henry's letter said not to trust any Sterling. Why should I?" "Because Henry Ashford was a liar and a thief." Marcus's voice remained calm, but something flickered behind his eyes. "My father was a war hero, Bronze Star 2 Purple Hearts. He came home and built a business that employed 300 people. Henry Ashford was his partner, his friend, someone he'd served with in combat. And Henry repaid that friendship by seducing my father's wife and stealing everything they'd built together. That's not what the evidence suggests." Marcus's jaw tightened. "What evidence? Letters written by a woman conducting an affair. Henry had 70 years to prepare his lies, to plant false evidence, to construct a narrative that painted him as the victim. But I have my father's business records. I have witness statements. I have proof that Henry Ashford systematically looted the partnership." "Then take it to court." "I've tried 17 lawsuits over 40 years. Lost every one because that goddamn trust Henry set up was airtight. But now you're here, the rightful heir. You can transfer the property voluntarily. We can avoid years of litigation. You walk away wealthy, I get closure, everyone wins." Bill studied the check again. $2 million. He could pay off every debt, buy a house, send Charlie to any school in the country, never worry about money again. It was tempting in a way that made his chest ache, but Margaret's warning echoed in his mind, and something about Marcus's desperation hidden beneath layers of expensive tailoring and practiced calm suggested this was about more than money. "I need time to think," Bill said. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Parker, William, may I call you Bill? I'm a veteran. 3 tours in Vietnam. I recognize a fellow working man when I see one. You're 60 years old, and retired on a pension that probably doesn't cover basic expenses. My finances are none of your business. I'm trying to help you understand the reality here. This house will destroy you financially. The property taxes alone are $40,000 in arrears. Restoration would cost $500,000 minimum. You can't afford this, but you can afford to walk away rich." Bill heard the door open behind him. Charlie stepped out, that notebook clutched in his hands, his face set with determination. "Grandpa, we can't sell." Not until we know the truth. Marcus looked at the boy with something that might have been pity. Son, sometimes the truth is just a story people tell themselves to feel better about bad choices. Your great-great-grandfather made bad choices. Don't let his mistakes ruin your future. My future's fine, Charlie said, but our family's past deserves to be understood. Brave words from a 12-year-old who doesn't understand what poverty really means. Marcus returned his attention to Bill. I've been patient. I've waited decades. But my patience has limits. You have 30 days to reconsider. After that, I'll file legal challenges to the trust. I'll tie this property up in court for years. And in the meantime, I'll make sure every building inspector, every zoning board, every environmental agency knows about the violations here. You'll be buried in fines and legal fees before you find whatever treasure Henry supposedly hid. He picked up his briefcase, the check disappearing back inside. The offer stands for 30 days. After that, we do this the hard way. Marcus walked to his Mercedes, moving with that predatory grace. Before getting in, he turned back. One more thing. People who refuse my offers tend to have unfortunate accidents. Ask Margaret Hayes about her husband sometime. The threat hung in the air long after the Mercedes disappeared down the overgrown drive. Bill's heart hammered against his ribs. 60 years old, and he'd just been threatened by a man who clearly had no qualms about violence. Charlie's hand found his. Grandpa, we can't let him win. No, Bill agreed, but we need to be smart, and we need help. They went back inside, closing and locking the heavy oak door. Bill pulled out his phone, calling the number Margaret Hayes had given him. She answered on the second ring. He came, didn't he? She said without preamble. How did you know? Because I've been watching the road for 71 years. I saw his car. 2 million. How did you? It's what he offered the Washington family in '95. And the Thompsons in 2003. Always 2 million. Enough to be tempting, not enough to make them truly wealthy, just enough to make them go away. Bill sank into a dusty chair in the parlor. He threatened us, said people who refuse him have accidents, said to ask you about your husband. Margaret's silence was heavy. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decades. Thomas died in 1985. Tractor rollover, brake failure. The sheriff ruled it accidental, but Thomas's tractor was new. He just had it serviced. And 3 days before he died, he told me he'd found something in the old Sterling manufacturing building. Documents that proved Robert Sterling was the embezzler, not Henry. What happened to the documents? Someone broke into our house the night Thomas died. While I was at the hospital watching him die, someone searched our home and took everything Thomas had found. No evidence, no proof, just my certainty and my grief. Bill looked at Charlie, who was listening intently. The boy was too young to hear these things, to learn that the world contained men who killed over secrets. But maybe that was a lesson everyone needed to learn eventually. Mrs. Hayes, I need your help. I need to understand what Henry hid and how to find it before Sterling makes good on his threats. Come to my house tonight. I have things to show you, things I've been saving for 70 years. Margaret Hayes lived in a small Victorian cottage next to the Ashford property, separated by an overgrown hedge that had once been carefully maintained. Her home was neat, preserved like a museum of mid-century American life. Doilies on furniture, photographs in silver frames. The particular smell of old houses where everything had its place. She was smaller than Bill expected, barely 5 feet tall, with white hair pulled into a severe bun. But her eyes were sharp, assessing missing nothing. She studied Bill's face when she opened the door. You have his eyes, she said. Henry's eyes, same color, same sadness. Come in. The living room was dominated by a wall of file cabinets. Decades of careful documentation, Margaret explained. Everything she could find about the Sterlings, about Henry, about the partnership. Newspaper clippings, court records, interview transcripts. A lifetime of amateur investigation. I was 6 years old when Eleanor died, Margaret said, settling into a worn armchair. But I remember her. She was beautiful and kind and trapped. My older brother David was Henry's best friend. They enlisted together, fought together. David died at the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Henry came home and promised to look after our family. She opened a file box, removing a leather-bound album. Inside were photographs Bill hadn't seen in the manor. Eleanor and Margaret as young women, arms around each other, laughing. Henry and David in uniform, looking impossibly young. Robert Sterling, severe even in his 20s, standing apart from the others. Eleanor married Robert in 1942, Margaret continued, before either of them shipped out. It was arranged by their families. Robert's people had money. Eleanor's didn't. When the men came home from the war, Robert and Henry started the partnership. Eleanor and Henry fell in love. Charlie leaned forward, and she got pregnant with Bill's grandfather, Michael, born June 1947. Robert claimed him as his own. Eleanor led him to avoid scandal to protect Henry's business reputation. They continued their affair in secret for 6 years. The manor was their refuge. Robert never came here, said it was too old-fashioned for his tastes. So Eleanor spent her days here with Henry, building a life they could never claim publicly. Margaret pulled out a letter yellowed with age, the paper thin as tissue. This is the last letter Eleanor wrote to me, March 14th, 1953, the day before she died. Bill read it aloud, his voice catching on the words. Dearest Margaret, if anything happens to me, know this. Robert knows I plan to leave. He's threatened me. He says he'll ruin. Henry claimed Henry seduced me to steal the business, destroy both our reputations. I'm not afraid for myself, but I fear for my son, and I fear Robert's rage. If I die unexpectedly, it wasn't an accident. Promise me you'll tell the truth when the time comes. The letter was dated March 14th, 1953. Eleanor died March 15th. Brake failure on a mountain road. Investigated and closed within 24 hours. The police report is in here too, Margaret said, opening another file. Official cause, mechanical failure, accidental death. But look at this. She produced a second document. A private investigator's report commissioned by Henry in April 1953. The PII had interviewed Eleanor's mechanic who swore he'd serviced her car on March 12th and the brakes were perfect. He'd examined the wreckage and found evidence the brake lines had been cut, not worn through naturally. Henry took this to the sheriff, Margaret said. The sheriff was on Robert Sterling's payroll. He refused to reopen the investigation. Said Henry was a jealous lover making wild accusations. Threatened to arrest Henry for filing false reports. Bill spread the documents across Margaret's coffee table. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Robert had motive. Robert had opportunity. Robert had the connections to ensure no real investigation happened. What about Henry's disappearance? Bill asked. Margaret's expression grew complicated. Henry came to see me on April 3rd, 1953. He was carrying a bag, looked like he'd been up for days. He said he confronted Robert with the evidence, demanded Robert confess to Eleanor's murder. Robert laughed at him. Said he'd destroy Henry if Henry went public, would claim Henry killed Eleanor in a jealous rage. So Henry ran. Henry was strategic. He told me he was going to disappear, let everyone think he'd fled with stolen money. He said it would buy time, that eventually the truth would come out when the right person came looking. He made me promise to keep watch over the property to help his heir when they finally arrived. She looked at Bill with those sharp eyes. He knew about you. Specifically, he'd been tracking Michael's life from a distance. He knew Michael had a son named William. He knew you'd struggle because Robert would make sure Michael never inherited anything. This whole elaborate plan, the vaults, the 70-year delay, all of it was designed to bring you here at exactly the right moment. Charlie had been quiet, absorbing everything. Now he spoke. Where do we start looking for the first vault? Margaret smiled. Henry left me a key. He said I'd know when to give it to his heir. She produced a small brass key from a drawer. This opens a safety deposit box at Millbrook First Bank. Box 729. The bank's been sold 3 times since 1953, but safe deposit boxes transfer with the building. Whatever Henry left there has been waiting 71 years. The next morning, Bill and Charlie went to the bank. The building was modern, all glass and steel, completely unlike the solid brick structure it had replaced. But in the basement vault, the old safe deposit boxes remained, their brass doors tarnished, but intact. Box 729 required 2 keys. Margaret's key and a second one that came with Bill's inheritance documents. The bank manager, a nervous young woman who'd clearly received a call from someone powerful, watched them with poorly concealed anxiety. I need to note that there's been a legal inquiry about this box, she said. Mr. Marcus Sterling has filed paperwork claiming potential claim to its contents. Marcus Sterling has no claim to anything that's mine, Bill said firmly. The box slid out smoothly despite its age. Inside was a leather portfolio sealed with wax. Bill's hands shook as he broke the seal. The portfolio contained 3 items. First, a map, hand-drawn showing the Ashford Manor in meticulous detail, including rooms that didn't appear on any official blueprint. 4 locations were marked with compass rose symbols. Vault 1, Vault 2, Vault 3, the heart. Second, a letter in Henry's handwriting. To my heir, this is the first step. Follow the compass rose. Each vault contains evidence and the key to the next. The full truth lives in the heart, but you must earn it step by step, proving you're worthy of this burden. The first vault is in the library behind the fireplace. The combination is Eleanor's birthday, July 11th, 40. Third, a photograph, Eleanor holding an infant. On the back, written in faded ink, Eleanor with Michael, our son, June 1947, the only family photo we were ever able to take. Bill stared at the baby in the photo. His father, Michael Parker, who died at 40 without ever knowing his real parents. A man who'd struggled his whole life with feeling unwanted, unloved, disposable. If only he'd known the truth. If only he'd understood that he'd been conceived in love, not duty. Maybe it would have changed something. Maybe it would have saved him. Grandpa, Charlie said softly, we need to go to the library. They returned to the manor, Margaret following in her own car. The library was exactly as they'd left it, dusty and abandoned. The fireplace dominated one wall, its marble mantel carved with elaborate details. Bill studied it carefully, looking for anything that might be a combination lock. Charlie found it first. Grandpa, these decorative stones, they're not attached. They rotate. The stones were small, perhaps 2 inches square, arranged in a decorative band around the fireplace opening. Each one could be turned to show different symbols, numbers, letters, astrological signs. Eleanor's birthday, Bill said. The letter says July 11th, 40. That's July 11th, 1940 in European format, day, month, year. He rotated the stones carefully. 071140. A click echoed from deep within the fireplace. The entire back panel swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a space approximately 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide. Inside was a metal box, fireproof with a simple latch. Bill lifted it carefully. It was surprisingly heavy, perhaps 30 pounds. He carried it to the library desk and opened it. The box contained layers of history. On top, bank statements from Ashford Sterling Manufacturing, 1946 through 1953. Bill skimmed them, his machinist's practical mind struggling with the financial terminology. But certain patterns were clear. Large withdrawals, all authorized by Robert Sterling's signature. Payments to shell companies with names like Midwest Holdings and Sterling Properties Incorporated. Amounts that totaled into the millions. Beneath the bank statements were contracts, partnership agreements showing that Henry and Robert had started as equal partners, 50-50 ownership. But amendments followed, each one shifting more control to Robert, each one signed under circumstances Henry had noted in the margins. Signed under duress, R threatened to expose affair. Forced signature, R says he'll claim I embezzled if I don't comply. Then came Eleanor's letters. 43 of them, arranged chronologically, each one a window into a love affair conducted in the margins of acceptable society. Bill read them with a growing ache in his chest. These weren't the letters of some cheap affair. They were the correspondence of 2 people who'd found something profound and were being destroyed by it. One letter, dated January 1950, was particularly devastating. My dearest Henry, Michael asked me today why his father doesn't love him. Robert ignores the boy, treats him like an obligation rather than a son. How do I tell a 3-year-old that the man raising him isn't his real father? That his real father watches from a distance, loving him desperately, but unable to claim him? This lie is destroying all of us. But I see no way out that doesn't destroy us worse. The final letter in the collection was the one Margaret had shown them. Eleanor's last words, written the day before her death, full of fear and determination and a strange peace. But at the very bottom of the box, Bill found something that made his blood run cold. An audio tape, reel to reel, the kind used in the 1950s. A label in Henry's handwriting, Robert's confession, recorded April 1st, 1953. Play this last. Margaret produced an old tape player from her car. I thought we might need this, she said. The tape hissed and popped as it began the audio quality poor after 70 years. But Robert Sterling's voice came through clearly enough. He was drunk, his words slurred, talking to someone whose voice wasn't captured by the microphone. Eleanor, stupid bitch, thought she could leave me. File for divorce. Make me look like a fool in front of the whole county. I showed her. Brake lines are easy to cut. Mountain roads are dangerous. Accidents happen all the time. Bill's hands clenched into fists. Charlie looked pale. Margaret's face was carved from stone. Robert's voice continued, and Henry thinks he's so smart, thinks he has evidence of me stealing from the business. I'll flip it on him, say he was the embezzler. He was screwing my wife who's gonna believe him, lovesick thief trying to cover his tracks. But Henry disappeared before I could pin it on him properly. Doesn't matter. Everyone thinks he ran off with the money anyway. The tape ran out. The silence in the library was absolute. Bill looked at his grandson, at Margaret, both of them processing what they just heard. Robert Sterling casually admitting to murdering his wife, confessing to embezzlement and fraud, planning to frame Henry for crimes Robert himself committed, all captured on tape 70 years ago. This is why Marcus wants this house so badly, Bill said. This tape would destroy the Sterling family's reputation, expose his father as a murderer, probably trigger lawsuits from every family Robert screwed over. It's more than that, Margaret said quietly. Marcus grew up worshiping his father. Robert died in 1991 when Marcus was 32. If this evidence had come out while Robert was alive, Marcus's whole life would have been different. He spent 3 decades protecting a legacy built on murder and lies. Charlie picked up the map. The tape says to play it last. That means there's more. Vault 2. The map says it's in the greenhouse, wherever that is. They found the greenhouse behind the manor, its glass panels mostly shattered, and its iron framework rusted but still standing. Inside, nature had reclaimed the space. Vines climbed everywhere. A fountain in the center had cracked its basin, filled with decades of fallen leaves. But the compass rose symbol on the map pointed clearly to the fountain base. Bill examined it, finding an inscription worn almost smooth by time. E+H, our secret garden, 1946. The fountain was marble circular, approximately 4 feet in diameter. Bill tapped it, hearing a hollow sound. Not solid stone, but hollow underneath. He and Charlie worked together, finding handholds lifting. The fountain base rose on a mechanism that still functioned after 70 years, revealing a cylindrical chamber, perhaps 6 feet deep. Inside was another metal container, this one shaped like a military footlocker. Inside the footlocker were Henry's war souvenirs, his uniform, his medals, combat journal from 1944 and 1945, photographs of his unit young men who'd barely survived Normandy, but also Eleanor's diary, a leather-bound book covering the years 1945 through 1953. Her private thoughts, her fears, her love, all preserved in careful handwriting that grew more desperate as the years passed. Bill read select entries aloud. June 1945. Met Robert's new partner today, Henry Ashford, a veteran like Robert, but different. Robert came home wanting conquest. Henry came home wanting peace. When Henry looked at me, I felt seen for the first time in my marriage. September 1946. I'm pregnant. The child is Henry's. I know this with absolute certainty. Robert and I rarely. He's not interested in me that way. But the timing works for Robert to believe it's his. Henry wants me to leave Robert, raise our child together. But I can't. The scandal would destroy Henry's business, ruin our child's future. I'll stay. I'll let Robert claim my baby. It's the only way to protect everyone I love. March 14th, 1953. I told Robert I'm leaving, showed him divorce papers. He became violent, hit me for the first time ever. Said he'd destroy Henry's claim. Henry seduced me to steal the business, make sure our son hates Henry forever. I'm not afraid. I'm leaving anyway. Tomorrow I meet with my lawyer to finalize everything. Michael deserves to know his real father. Whatever happens, I regret nothing. Loving Henry was the one true thing in my false life. The entry was dated one day before Eleanor died. The diary ended there mid-sentence as though Eleanor had been interrupted and never returned to finish her thought. Beneath the diary was something that made the hairs on Bill's neck stand up. Another audio tape. This one labeled Robert Sterling, recorded secretly, March 14th, 1953. They took it back to the house to the tape player. This recording was clearer, more recent. Henry had apparently hidden a recording device somewhere in the Sterling home. Robert's voice was sober this time, cold and calculating. He was talking to someone making plans. Eleanor's meeting with her lawyer tomorrow at 10, Mountain Road between here and Bloomington. Lot of curves, long drop if someone goes over the edge. I'll work on her car tonight. Brake lines, clean cut, nothing suspicious. By the time anyone examines the wreckage, it'll look like road wear, natural failure. The other voicemail, but younger, asked, "What about Ashford? Let him mourn, let him suffer. Then if he causes trouble, we'll deal with him too. One way or another, this ends with me in control of everything." Bill stopped the tape. He couldn't listen anymore. The casual planning of murder discussed like a business transaction was more than he could stomach. Charlie's face was white. They planned everything, covered their tracks. And they got away with it, Margaret said. For 70 years, the Sterlings have been respectable members of society, philanthropists, business leaders, all built on murder and theft. Bill's phone rang, unknown number. He answered, half expecting Marcus Sterling's voice. Instead, it was the building inspector who'd visited the week before. "Mr. Parker, I'm calling to inform you that based on my inspection, the Ashford Manor is being red-tagged as uninhabitable. You have 72 hours to vacate or face daily fines of $1,000. On what grounds? Structural instability, electrical hazards, mold contamination. The list is extensive. You'll receive the full report by certified mail." The inspector hung up before Bill could argue. He looked at Margaret. "This is Marcus. He's applying pressure." "It'll get worse," Margaret warned. "He'll use every lever he has. Building inspectors, zoning boards, environmental agencies. He's had decades to build his network." Over the next week, the harassment escalated exactly as Margaret predicted. The environmental agency demanded soil testing for potential contamination. Cost $8,500. Timeline 6 to 8 weeks. A representative from the Indiana Historical Society appeared suggesting the manor qualified for historic designation, which would require approval for any renovation work and add months of bureaucratic delay. Most disturbing was the visit from Child Services. A social worker appeared at the manor, clipboard in hand, expressing concern about Charlie living in an unsafe structure. "We may need to place him in temporary foster care pending a safety assessment," she said, her tone apologetic but firm. Bill saw Marcus's hand in every action. The man was systematically making it impossible for Bill to remain in Millbrook, forcing him toward that $2 million offer through sheer bureaucratic exhaustion. But Bill had spent 60 years as a working-class American. He knew how to be stubborn. On the 10th day after finding the second vault, Margaret called with urgency in her voice. "Bill, you need to come to my house, now. I found something in Thomas's old papers. Something important." She met them at her door, her face pale. "I've been going through Thomas's belongings, things I put in storage after he died. I found his notes from before the accident. He'd made a copy of the map he found in the Sterling Manufacturing Building. The original was stolen the night he died, but Thomas was careful. He'd hidden a copy in our safety deposit box." She spread the photocopy across her kitchen table. It was similar to Henry's map, but with additional notations. Vault 3 was marked in the manor's tower room, but there was something else. Another location labeled the Arsenal. "What's the Arsenal?" Charlie asked. "I don't know, but Thomas wrote notes here. Arsenal located in Manor Basement Foundation. Henry's insurance policy. Use only if Sterling's threaten violence." Bill studied the notation. Insurance policy. That suggested something dangerous, something Henry had prepared as a last resort. "We need to find Vault 3 first," Bill said. "Follow the sequence Henry laid out." The tower room was accessed by a narrow spiral staircase, the steps worn smooth by a century of feet. At the top was a circular chamber, windows on all sides providing views of the entire property. The ceiling was painted with constellations, stars and planets arranged in patterns that must have meant something to someone. Charlie studied the ceiling while Bill examined the floor. The boy's eye for patterns honed by months of studying Henry's clues spotted something Bill missed. Grandpa, some of these stars are painted gold, not silver, and they make a pattern. Bill looked up. Charlie was right. Scattered among the silver stars were golden ones, and when Bill traced their positions, they formed the compass rose symbol from Henry's map. The golden stars all pointed toward one section of the curved wall. Bill examined it closely, finding that the plaster here was slightly different texture than the rest. He pressed, and a section swung inward, revealing a narrow passage behind the wall. They descended carefully, flashlights cutting through darkness that had been undisturbed for 70 years. The passage led to a small room, perhaps 10 by 10 feet, built into the space between the tower's outer wall and inner structure. This room was different from the others. Instead of metal boxes, the walls were covered with corkboard, and pinned to them were documents, photographs, maps, all connected with red string like a detective's investigation board. This was Henry's war room, where he'd spent years building his case against Robert Sterling. The centerpiece was a genealogy chart, more detailed than anything Bill had seen before. It showed the Sterling family going back to 1880, and beside many names were notations. Embezzlement 1923, insurance fraud 1931, murder for hire 1938. The Sterling family's criminal history stretched back generations. But one set of documents made Bill's hands shake. Letters from Margaret's brother David Hayes, written in 1944 from France. The letters described Robert Sterling's behavior during combat, how he'd killed surrendered prisoners, how he'd talked about taking what he wanted when the war ended, how he'd questioned David about the Hayes family fortune and what would happen if David died in combat. The final letter was dated December 10th, 1944, 6 days before David was killed at the Battle of the Bulge. Henry, something's wrong with Robert. He tried to get me to volunteer for a suicide mission. When I refused, he said, accidents happen in war. I'm scared. If I don't make it home, investigate my death. Tell Margaret I love her. An Army investigation report was pinned beside the letter. David Hayes had been killed by friendly fire during a German counterattack. The official report listed it as a tragic accident, fog of war, no fault assigned. But a witness statement unsigned described seeing Sergeant Sterling shoot Corporal Hayes from behind, then claim he'd thought Hayes was a German infiltrator. The investigation had been closed due to lack of evidence. Robert Sterling had returned home a decorated veteran. He'd become executor of the Hayes family estate, managing Margaret's inheritance. And over the next 10 years, he'd embezzled nearly $2 million from that estate, leaving Margaret with a fraction of what her family had left her. Bill looked at Margaret, who'd followed them up the tower. Her face was carved from stone, decades of suspicion finally confirmed. He killed David, she whispered. For money, for my family's fortune. And he got away with it, Bill said. Just like he got away with killing Eleanor, just like he nearly got away with framing Henry. The room contained one more crucial document, a map to the arsenal with detailed instructions. Located in basement foundation behind old furnace, combination lock 07-11-40, contains final insurance. Use only if Sterling family threatens direct violence. Will destroy them, but also expose everything. As Bill studied the map, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You have 24 hours to accept my offer. After that, unfortunate things may happen. Accidents, like your son's overdose. Easy to arrange, easy to cover up. Think about Charlie, Marcus Sterling. Bill showed the message to Margaret and Charlie. The threat was clear and immediate. Marcus wasn't going to wait anymore. We need to go to the arsenal tonight, Bill said, and then we're going to end this. The basement was accessed through the kitchen, stone steps leading down into darkness that smelled of earth and decay. Bill's flashlight revealed a space that ran the length of the house with a ceiling so low he had to duck. An ancient furnace dominated one corner, its bulk like some industrial-age monster sleeping in the shadows. Behind the furnace, exactly as Thomas's map indicated, was a section of wall that looked different from the rest. Newer mortar, different colored brick. Bill examined it closely and found what he was looking for. A combination lock hidden behind a loose brick, its face still gleaming despite 7 decades underground. Eleanor's birthday, 071140. The lock clicked open. Bill pulled and the entire wall section swung outward on hidden hinges. Beyond was a room perhaps 8 by 8 feet, lined with metal filing cabinets and shelves. This was Henry's arsenal. Not weapons, but something far more dangerous to the Sterling family. Complete documentation of 80 years of Sterling crimes meticulously organized and preserved. The first cabinet contained Robert Sterling's personal records, his war crimes, his embezzlement schemes, his manipulation of Eleanor, his murder plots, all documented with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. The second cabinet held evidence against Robert's father and grandfather, bootlegging during Prohibition, insurance fraud during the Depression, union busting that had resulted in workers' deaths, a family history of treating laws as suggestions and human lives as expendable. The third cabinet was labeled Marcus James Sterling, 1959 to present. Bill opened it with trembling hands. Inside were decades of documentation. Marcus's harassment campaigns against property owners, his bribery of public officials, his use of legal systems to steal from working families, and most damning evidence that Marcus had killed his own father in 1991. Hospital records showing Robert Sterling's sudden decline, toxicology reports that had been suppressed, witness statements from nurses who'd seen Marcus administering medication to his father, a recorded conversation secretly taped where Marcus admitted to a confidant that he'd accelerated Robert's death with fentanyl to prevent the old man from revealing family secrets in his drunken ramblings. But Henry had prepared one more surprise. At the back of the arsenal was a steel box with a timer mechanism. The timer was set to trigger in 2024, exactly 70 years after Henry's disappearance. Inside the box was a complete set of documents ready to be mailed to the FBI major newspapers and television networks. A dead man's switch ensuring that even if Marcus found and destroyed the arsenal, the evidence would still surface at the appointed time. Bill stared at the timer. It was set to activate it in 3 days. Henry planned everything, Charlie said. Even if we'd never come, even if we'd sold to Marcus, the truth would still come out. But we did come, Bill said, and we can do better than waiting for a timer. We can hand this evidence to the FBI now. End this before Marcus can hurt anyone else. Margaret was examining the filing cabinets with tears streaming down her face. 71 years. I've waited 71 years to see proof that David was murdered, that Thomas was murdered, that I wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid, wasn't making up conspiracies. It was all real, all true. A sound from upstairs made them all freeze. Footsteps, heavy, multiple people. Bill's phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. I know you're in the basement. I know you found the arsenal. Come up now and we can still make a deal. Refuse and none of you leave that house alive. Bill looked at Charlie, fear and determination warring in his chest. He'd survived 60 years of hardship, but he'd never faced a man who'd killed multiple times and clearly had no intention of stopping. Grandpa, Charlie whispered, Margaret said Henry set up something with the FBI, some kind of code. Margaret nodded. Ashford 29, his unit number from the war. If I call the FBI field office in Indianapolis and say those words, agents are supposed to respond immediately. Henry arranged it 70 years ago as a failsafe. Do it, Bill said. Do it now. Margaret pulled out her phone, but before she could dial, Marcus Sterling appeared at the top of the basement stairs. He had 2 men with him, both carrying weapons, both with the hard eyes of people who'd done violence before and would do it again. Don't bother calling, Marcus said. I've been jamming cell signals in this area for the past hour. Nobody's calling anyone. He descended the stairs slowly, his expensive shoes clicking on stone. Mr. Parker, Margaret, and young Charlie. I'd hoped it wouldn't come to this. I really did, but you've left me no choice. Bill stepped in front of Charlie. You can't kill all 3 of us and claim it was self-defense. Can I? 3 trespassers in a condemned building, armed and dangerous. I had to defend myself. The sheriff will write it up exactly the way I tell him to, just like he did with Eleanor. Just like he did with Thomas Hayes. Marcus reached the bottom of the stairs, his eyes fixed on the open arsenal. 70 years. Do you know how many times I've searched this house? How many engineers I've hired to examine the structure? How much money I've spent trying to find what you found in 2 weeks? Maybe because we're family, Bill said. Maybe because Henry designed this for us, not for you. Family, Marcus spat the word like a curse. Henry Ashford destroyed my family, made my father a murderer, made me grow up worshiping a monster. And when I finally learned the truth, when my father drunkenly confessed everything before he died, I realized the only way to save our family name was to bury the evidence forever. I gave him peace with fentanyl, something he didn't deserve, but I provided anyway. So you killed him, Margaret said. Killed your own father. I gave him mercy. He was dying anyway. Liver failure. I just accelerated it to protect the Sterling legacy, because that's what sons do. We protect our families even from themselves. Marcus gestured to his men. Search the arsenal. Take everything. We burn it all tonight. But as his men moved forward, a sound echoed through the basement. Sirens, multiple vehicles, the unmistakable rumble of heavy law enforcement response. Marcus's face went white. That's impossible. I jammed the signals. Charlie held up a small device, grinning. You jam cell phones, but this is an emergency beacon. Henry hid it in the arsenal with instructions. Press the button, and it sends a distress signal that can't be jammed. I pressed it 10 minutes ago when you were still upstairs. The basement filled with law enforcement, FBI agents, state police, even local officers who'd been bought by Sterling money for decades, but who couldn't ignore a federal response. Special Agent Sarah Chen led the team, her credentials already out. Marcus Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and attempted murder. Gentlemen, drop your weapons. Marcus's men complied immediately, their loyalty extending only as far as their paychecks. But Marcus himself stood frozen, staring at the arsenal that represented his family's destruction. This can't be happening, he whispered. I've been so careful, so patient. 70 years, Bill said. Henry was patient too, and he was smarter than you. As agents handcuffed Marcus and led him up the stairs, the man turned back one last time. I'm sorry, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. My father poisoned everything he touched, including me. I spent my whole life trying to protect a legacy that wasn't worth protecting. You win, Parker. Henry wins. Maybe that's justice. Then he was gone, and Bill was left standing in the arsenal with Charlie and Margaret, surrounded by evidence of crimes that span generations. Agent Chen approached her, expression professional, but not unsympathetic. Mr. Parker, we're going to need to take custody of all this evidence. But I want you to know, based on what I'm seeing here, we'll be opening investigations into dozens of Sterling crimes. This is going to be one of the largest white-collar crime cases in Indiana history. What about us? Bill asked. The house, the inheritance, all yours, legally obtained, properly transferred. And once we verify the sources of the money in Henry's accounts, that's yours too. Preliminary examination suggests approximately $900 million in legitimate assets accumulated over decades of careful investment. $900 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. Bill looked at Charlie, whose eyes were wide with shock. Grandpa, the boy said, we're rich. We're secure, Bill corrected. There's a difference, Agent Chen smiled. I'd like to talk to you about consulting for the Bureau. We've identified a pattern of wealthy families using legal harassment to steal property from working people. Your experience could help us stop them. Bill thought about it. 60 years old, a retired machinist who'd stumbled into a mystery that changed his life. Maybe he had more to contribute than he'd thought. I'll consider it, he said. As law enforcement cleared the house, cataloging evidence and arresting Marcus's associates, Bill and Charlie and Margaret stood on the front porch watching the sun set behind the manor's towers. The house that had seemed like a burden 3 weeks ago now felt like home, like possibility, like justice finally served. What happens now? Charlie asked. Bill put his arm around his grandson. Now we live. We use this gift to build something good. We help families like ours who've been crushed by people like the Sterlings. We make sure Henry and Eleanor's sacrifice meant something. Margaret smiled. Henry would like that. He always believed in redemption, in second chances, in the idea that love and justice could triumph if you were patient enough. 70 years is pretty patient, Charlie observed, but worth it, Bill said. Some things are worth waiting for. They stood together as darkness fell, 3 generations connected by blood and sacrifice, in a story that had waited 7 decades to reach its conclusion. The manor's windows glowed with light for the first time in 70 years. Inside, FBI agents cataloged evidence that would bring down a criminal dynasty and restore justice to dozens of families. But out here in the quiet evening air, Bill felt something else. Peace, purpose. The sense that his life, which had seemed so small and desperate just weeks ago, was part of something larger. Henry and Eleanor's love hadn't died with them. It had transformed, become something that could heal wounds across generations, break cycles of poverty and violence, turn tragedy into hope. Charlie leaned against him. I'm going to write about this, not just for school, a real book, so everyone knows what Henry and Eleanor did. Good, Bill said. Tell their story. Make sure it's remembered. Margaret was already planning. The foundation needs to expand. More states, more families. We have the resources now. We can help thousands of people. Bill nodded. They would do all of that, but first they would rest. They would let the weight of these weeks settle. They would grieve for the people who'd died too young, who'd never known they were loved, who'd been destroyed by sterling greed. And then they would build. They would take Henry's gift and turn it into something that would last another 70 years, another 100. A legacy not of hidden vaults and secret evidence, but of lives changed, families helped, cycles broken. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming winter. Bill pulled Charlie closer, feeling grateful for this boy who'd given him purpose when David's death had nearly destroyed them both. His son was gone, would always be gone. But Charlie was here. And together they would honor the dead by living well, by fighting for justice, by proving that love could survive even when everything else burned away. Come on, Bill said. Let's go inside. We have a lot of work ahead of us. They walked into the manor together, leaving the darkness behind, stepping into light and possibility, and the future that Henry and Eleanor had preserved for them across 7 decades of patient waiting. The treasure hunt was over. The real work was just beginning. The federal courthouse in Indianapolis stood like a monument to justice, deferred, its limestone columns gray against the spring sky. Bill Parker sat in the gallery, his arthritic hands folded in his lap, watching Marcus Sterling being led to the defendant's table in handcuffs. 6 months had passed since that night in the arsenal, 6 months of depositions and evidence cataloging and legal maneuvering. Now finally the trial. Marcus looked diminished. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a plain gray outfit provided by the county jail. His military bearing had collapsed into the hunched posture of a man who'd spent too many nights in a cell measuring exactly 8 by 10 feet. But his eyes still held that cold calculation, still assessed the courtroom like a battlefield, where victory might yet be snatched from the jaws of defeat. Charlie sat beside Bill, 13, now taller than 6 months ago, his shoulders broader from the good meals and stability that money could buy. The boy wore a suit not because anyone required it, but because he'd insisted. This is important, Grandpa, he'd said that morning. We should look like we respect the process. Margaret Hayes occupied the row behind them, 76 years old, and fierce as ever. She'd waited 7 decades for this moment, had kept her vigil beside the Ashford property through 3 failed marriages, 2 recessions, and the slow death of everything Millbrook had once been. Her testimony would be crucial. The prosecution had told Bill that Margaret's credibility, her decades of patient documentation, would seal Marcus Sterling's fate more effectively than any forensic evidence. The prosecution was led by a woman named Jennifer Walsh, 40-something, with the particular intensity of federal prosecutors who'd built their careers on taking down powerful men who thought themselves untouchable. She'd spent 3 months building the case, assembling Henry Ashford's 70-year-old evidence into a narrative that even the most skeptical juror couldn't dismiss. The defense attorney was expensive, brought in from Chicago, a man named Richard Blackwell, who specialized in saving the reputations of wealthy defendants. But even Blackwell looked uncomfortable. The evidence was simply too overwhelming, too meticulously documented, too damning. Judge Patricia Morrison called the court to order. She was 68, a Reagan appointee who'd spent 4 decades on the federal bench developing a reputation for fairness and an absolute intolerance for courtroom theatrics. Her gray hair was pulled back severely. Her reading glasses hung on a chain around her neck. When she spoke, everyone listened. The United States versus Marcus James Sterling, she intoned. Charges include first-degree murder, attempted murder, extortion, wire fraud, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. How does the defendant plead? Marcus stood. For a moment, the old arrogance flickered across his face. Then it died, replaced by something that looked almost like resignation. Not guilty, Your Honor. The trial proceeded with the methodical efficiency of the federal system. Walsh presented her case with surgical precision, each piece of evidence building on the last, constructing a narrative that spanned 80 years of Sterling family crime. Day one focused on Eleanor's murder. Walsh played Robert Sterling's confession tape, the one Henry had recorded in 1953. The audio quality was poor, the recording hissing and popping with age, but Robert's voice came through clearly enough. His drunken bragging about cutting Eleanor's brake lines, his casual dismissal of her life, his contempt for the woman who dared to leave him. The courtroom fell silent as Robert's voice filled the space. Eleanor, stupid bitch, thought she could leave me. File for divorce. Make me look like a fool. I showed her. Brake lines are easy. Mountain roads are dangerous. Accidents happen. Bill watched the jury. 12 faces carefully selected for their ability to remain impartial, but even they couldn't hide their reactions. Shock, disgust, the particular horror of hearing a man casually confess to murdering his wife. Walsh let the silence stretch after the tape ended. Then quietly she said, "That was Robert Sterling, Marcus Sterling's father, recorded without his knowledge on April 1st, 1953. He's admitting to the murder of Eleanor Ashford, a woman the official record lists as dying in an accidental brake failure. A woman whose death was investigated by a sheriff on Robert Sterling's payroll and closed within 24 hours. She turned to face the jury directly. But this case isn't just about Robert Sterling's crimes. It's about his son's crimes. Marcus Sterling knew about his father's confession. He heard it directly from Robert before administering a lethal dose of fentanyl in 1991. And rather than come forward, rather than seek justice for Eleanor, Marcus killed his own father to prevent this evidence from ever surfacing. Day two brought forensic evidence. A toxicologist testified that Robert Sterling's death in 1991, officially attributed to liver failure from decades of alcoholism, showed traces of fentanyl in preserved tissue samples. The doses were subtle, administered over weeks, accelerating organ failure that would have occurred eventually, but turning it into certain death within a specific time frame. Someone with medical knowledge would have known exactly how much to administer, the toxicologist explained. Enough to be fatal, not enough to trigger immediate suspicion. Walsh introduced Marcus Sterling's military records. He'd been a combat medic in Vietnam before transferring to the Rangers. He'd had extensive training in pharmaceuticals dosing and the effects of various drugs on human physiology. The implication was clear. Day three focused on the harassment campaign against Bill and Charlie. The building inspector who'd red-tagged the Ashford Manor testified, his voice shaking, that Marcus had paid him $5,000 to find violations whether they existed or not. The environmental agency representative admitted under oath that the soil contamination report had been fabricated at Sterling's request. The social worker who'd threatened to remove Charlie from Bill's custody broke down on the stand, sobbing about the pressure Sterling had applied, the threats he'd made against her career. He said, "If I didn't cooperate, he'd make sure I never worked in social services again," she testified. He said he had judges, politicians, people who owed him favors. "I was scared. I have student loans. I need this job. So I did what he asked. I'm so sorry." Day four brought Margaret Hayes to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her head high, dressed in a simple blue dress, her white hair perfectly arranged. Walsh approached her gently. "Mrs. Hayes, you've lived in Millbrook your entire life, is that correct?" 76 years, Margaret confirmed. "Born there, probably die there. And you knew Henry Ashford personally?" "I did. He was my older brother's best friend. David Hayes. They served together in the 29th Infantry Division. David was killed at the Battle of the Bulge. Henry came home and looked after our family. He was like a brother to me." "And you knew Eleanor Sterling?" Margaret's face softened. "Eleanor was my best friend. We grew up together. She was kind and intelligent and trapped in a marriage to a monster." "Objection," Blackwell said. "Characterization." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "The witness will stick to facts." Margaret nodded. "Eleanor married Robert Sterling in 1942. It was arranged by their families. Robert's family had money. Eleanor's didn't. After the war, when Henry came home and partnered with Robert in business, Eleanor and Henry fell in love. It was impossible to miss if you knew them, the way they looked at each other." "Did Eleanor tell you about the affair?" "She did. She was torn up about it. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but she couldn't help loving Henry. When she got pregnant in 1946, she knew the child was Henry's. But she let Robert claim the baby, to avoid scandal, to protect everyone. Walsh introduced Eleanor's letters into evidence. 43 letters written between 1945 and 1953, each one a testament to love that couldn't be lived openly. Margaret had preserved them, kept them safe for 7 decades, waiting for the moment when they could finally tell Eleanor's story. Walsh read one aloud. March 10th, 1953. My dearest Henry, Robert knows. I don't know how, but he knows everything. He's threatened to destroy you, claim you seduced me to steal the business, ruin both our reputations. I told him I'm leaving anyway. I can't live this lie anymore. Michael deserves to know his real father. Robert said if I leave, I'll regret it. I'm afraid, Henry, not for myself, for you, for our son. If anything happens, promise me you'll protect Michael. Promise me you'll expose Robert eventually. The letter was dated 5 days before Eleanor died. The connection was impossible to miss. Margaret testified about Thomas, her husband, killed in 1985 after finding evidence in the old Sterling manufacturing building. She produced Thomas's notes, his map, his careful documentation of what he'd discovered. She explained how the papers had disappeared the night Thomas died, how the brake failure on his tractor had been too convenient, too similar to Eleanor's death. I knew Marcus killed him, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. But I couldn't prove it. I had no evidence, no witnesses, just the certainty in my heart. So I waited. I collected what evidence I could. I kept watch over the Ashford property, and I waited for Henry's heir to come home. On day 5, Bill took the stand. Walsh walked him through his inheritance, his discovery of the vaults, Marcus's threats. He told me he'd make Charlie disappear into foster care, Bill testified, said he had judges and social workers on payroll, said he could make my grandson vanish into the system and I'd never see him again. Then when that didn't work, he came to the arsenal with armed men. He said, and I quote, hand over everything or I kill all 3 of you, and claims self-defense. And you have recordings of these threats. Yes, the emergency beacon Henry had installed in the arsenal activated FBI surveillance. They captured everything. The recordings played in court. Marcus's voice cold and controlled, making threats that left no room for interpretation. The jury listened with expressions ranging from disgust to outrage. Blackwell's cross-examination was brief. He couldn't dispute the recordings, couldn't explain away the evidence. Instead, he tried to humanize Marcus, to paint him as a son protecting his father's legacy, a veteran damaged by war and circumstance. Mr. Parker, you stand to inherit approximately $900 million as a result of these proceedings, correct? I inherited it already, and Bill said. Whether Marcus goes to prison or not doesn't change that. I'm here because he threatened my family and covered up murders for decades. The money's irrelevant. On day 6, Marcus took the stand. Blackwell had clearly advised against it, but Marcus insisted. The old arrogance was back, the belief that he could talk his way out of anything if given the chance. Walsh approached him like a surgeon approaching a tumor. Mr. Sterling, you knew your father murdered Eleanor, didn't you? I believe my father was the victim, Marcus said. Henry Ashford seduced my mother, manipulated the business. I spent my life trying to recover what I thought was stolen from my family. But you knew the truth. Your father told you before he died. Marcus hesitated. The courtroom held its breath. Yes, he finally said. He told me. In 1991, when he was dying, he was drunk, rambling. He confessed to cutting Eleanor's brake lines, to embezzling from the partnership, to planning to frame Henry. And instead of going to the authorities, instead of seeking justice for Eleanor, you killed him. I gave him peace. He was dying anyway. Liver failure. The fentanyl just accelerated what was inevitable. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison hammered her gavel. Order, I will have order, Walsh pressed forward. You administered fentanyl to your dying father to prevent him from being prosecuted for murder. To protect the family name, Marcus said. The Sterlings have been pillars of Indiana society for 100 years. I couldn't let it be destroyed by ancient history. Ancient history. You committed crimes this year. You've been extorting families for 30 years. You threatened to murder a 12-year-old boy. This isn't history, Mr. Sterling. This is ongoing criminal enterprise. Marcus's composure finally cracked. I'm not a monster. I'm a son trying to honor his father. I'm a veteran who served my country. 3 tours in Vietnam. I deserve respect. I deserve... You deserve justice, Walsh interrupted. Same justice Eleanor Ashford, Henry Ashford, David Hayes, Thomas Hayes, and 47 other families deserved. No more, no less. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Bill spent that time in the courthouse cafeteria with Charlie and Margaret drinking bad coffee and waiting for the system to work the way it was supposed to work. Rebecca was there too, the woman Bill had met at the foundation fundraiser 2 months earlier. She sat beside him, her hand occasionally touching his arm, offering silent support. They'd been dating for 6 weeks, slow and cautious, both of them damaged by loss and wary of rushing into anything. But there was something solid there, something built on shared experience and mutual respect. Rebecca understood what it meant to lose a spouse, to raise children alone, to find purpose in helping others. She didn't need Bill to be anything other than what he was. When the jury returned, Bill's heart hammered in his chest. 60 years old, and he felt like a kid again, nervous and hopeful, and terrified of disappointment. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have your honor. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Robert Sterling, how do you find guilty? The word hung in the air like a bell tone. Margaret gasped. Charlie squeezed Bill's hand. Rebecca's fingers tightened on his arm. On the charge of attempted murder of William and Charles Parker, how do you find guilty? On 47 counts of extortion, how do you find a guilty on all counts? It continued. Every charge, every count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Marcus sat perfectly still, his face carved from stone. Only his hands moved clenching and unclenching in his lap. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Morrison showed no mercy. Life in prison without possibility of parole for the murder. An additional 50 years for the fraud and extortion charges. $900 million in restitution to victims paid from assets Marcus had spent his entire life trying to steal. Marcus was given the opportunity to make a final statement. He stood, and for a moment, Bill saw not the cold predator, but the damaged boy who'd grown up with Robert Sterling as a father. I was raised to believe my family was special, Marcus said. Better than others, entitled to success. My father poisoned me with his lies. I've wasted my entire life defending a monster. I became what he was. He turned to look at Bill. I'm sorry to the families I've hurt. I'm sorry I couldn't be better than the man who raised me. Then he was led away, and Bill never saw him again. The months that followed were a blur of transformation. The Ashford Manor was fully restored, every board replaced, every window repaired, every room returned to its former glory. Bill hired local contractors, pumping money into Millbrook's economy, giving jobs to craftsmen who'd been unemployed for years. The secret passages were preserved as historical features. The vault rooms became museum spaces telling the story of Henry and Eleanor's forbidden love and Marcus Sterling's eventual downfall. The Eleanor Ashford Foundation expanded beyond Bill's wildest imagination. With $200 million in funding and professional management, they helped thousands of families. Veterans received PTSD treatment and addiction support. Single parents got childcare assistance and job training. Families facing corporate harassment found legal defenders who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Bill worked part-time as a consultant for the FBI, reviewing cases of wealthy families using legal systems to steal from working people. He found he had a talent for it, for seeing the patterns of abuse and identifying the leverage points where intervention could make a difference. The work gave him purpose beyond the money, a sense that he was finishing what Henry had started. Charlie thrived. The quiet, withdrawn boy who'd watched his father's overdose had become a confident young man with a mission. He joined the foundation's junior board, sat in on meetings, learned the mechanics of philanthropy. But more importantly, he'd started writing. A book about Eleanor and Henry, about love across class lines and justice delayed, but not denied. His English teacher said it showed real promise. And then there was Rebecca, Dr. Rebecca Chen, 56 years old, professor of social work, widow, mother of 2 grown children. They'd met at a foundation fundraiser, had connected over shared loss in the peculiar challenge of rebuilding life after tragedy. Their courtship was slow, appropriate for 2 people in their late 50s who'd learned that love didn't have to be rushed to be real. They married in September, a small ceremony at the Ashford Manor with Charlie as best man and Margaret is maid of honor. No big production, no elaborate celebration. Just two damaged people promising to be gentle with each other's wounds. Rebecca moved into the manor, bringing her books and her late husband's medals, in the particular grace of a woman who'd survived hell and come out softer, not harder. She understood Bill's nightmares, the ones where he found David blue-lipped on the bathroom floor again and again. She held him through them, anchored him, reminded him that the past couldn't be changed, but the future could be built. On a cold November morning, 1 year after the inheritance letter had arrived, Bill stood in the Millbrook Cemetery. Charlie and Rebecca flanked him. Margaret stood slightly apart, her hand resting on the headstone of her husband Thomas. Eleanor's grave had a new marker. The old one, which had listed her as Eleanor Sterling, beloved wife, had been replaced with the truth. Eleanor Margaret Ashford, 1925 to 1953, beloved of Henry James Ashford, mother of Michael Parker. A woman who loved deeply and sacrificed everything. True love defies convention. Beside it, a memorial marker for Henry. His body had never been found, but Bill had insisted on creating a place to honor him. Henry James Ashford, 1922 to 1953, Corporal 29th Infantry Division, Silver Star, Purple Heart. Loving father who protected his family across generations. Semper Fidelis. Bill placed flowers on both markers. White roses for Eleanor, red for Henry. The symbolism felt right. I never knew you, he said quietly. Never heard your voices. Never saw you smile or cry or make the thousand small choices that make up a life. But you shaped my world anyway. You built a plan that took 70 years to unfold. You trusted that your blood would come home, would finish what you started, would turn your tragedy into other people's hope. He paused, his arthritic hands steady on the cold marble. We did it. We exposed the Sterlings. We got justice for you and for all the families they destroyed. And we built something good from the ruins. The foundation helps thousands of people. Charlie's going to run it someday. Your legacy isn't just money. It's lives changed, cycles broken, hope restored. Charlie placed his own flowers and stepped back. Great-great-grandpa Henry, great-great-grandma Eleanor. I promise I'll tell your story right. I'll make sure people know you were brave and good and that you loved each other even when the world said you couldn't. Margaret was the last to approach. She moved slowly, age finally catching up with her, 76 years. But her voice was strong when she spoke. Eleanor, it's been 71 years since you died. I've waited my whole life to see your name cleared to tell the world what the Sterlings did to you. Thank you, Bill, for finishing what Henry and I couldn't. They stood together in the quiet cemetery, four people connected by bloodlines and choices made decades before any of them were born. The November wind was cold, carrying the scent of coming snow. Winter was arriving, but spring would follow. It always did. That evening, as the sun set behind the manor's restored towers, Bill sat in Henry's study. The room was his office, now filled with foundation paperwork and FBI and case files, in the comfortable clutter of a life lived with purpose. But he'd kept Henry's desk, the mahogany piece with its locked drawer. He'd never forced the lock, had waited for the right moment. Now, 1 year after everything changed felt right. The key was in the small envelope he'd been told to open only at the manor. He'd forgotten about it in the chaos of vault discoveries and Sterling confrontations. Now he retrieved it from the safe, a small brass key with an ornate head. It fit the drawer perfectly. Inside, one final letter waited. The envelope was sealed with that same red wax impressed with the compass rose. To William Parker, open after 1 year of foundation operation. Bill's hands shook as he broke the seal. The letter was dated April 3rd, 1953, the day before Henry disappeared. William, my great-grandson. If you're reading this, a year has passed since you found the first vault. You've uncovered all my secrets. You've brought Marcus Sterling to justice. You've started the foundation. You've honored Eleanor's memory in ways I could only dream of. There's one final truth, one I've kept even from Margaret because some truths are too heavy for anyone but blood to carry. April 4th, 1953. I confronted Robert Sterling with everything. The private investigator's report proving Eleanor's brake lines were cut. The recordings of him planning her murder. The evidence of his embezzlement. 43 love letters Eleanor and I had exchanged, each one a testament to what we'd built in the shadows. I had a gun in my coat pocket, a Colt 1911, the same one I'd carried through France. I'd survived Normandy, survived the Battle of the Bulge, survived seeing boys younger than me die in the snow, and in that moment, facing the man who'd murdered the only woman I'd ever loved, I wanted nothing more than to put a bullet through Robert Sterling's heart. He laughed at me, William, laughed and poured himself another whiskey. Said if I went public, he'd claim I was the embezzler. Said I was the jealous lover who killed Eleanor when she wouldn't leave her husband. Said who would believe a man who was sleeping with another man's wife? He had the sheriff, the coroner, the judge. He had the whole county in his pocket. And then he said the worst thing. He told me he'd raise my son, your grandfather Michael, to hate me. Would tell the boys stories about what a coward Henry Ashford was, how I ran away with stolen money, how I destroyed good people's lives. Said my own blood would grow up thinking I was trash. My finger was on the trigger. One squeeze, and it would all be over. But I didn't pull it. Why? Because killing him would make me a murderer, would give his lies credibility, would mean Michael would grow up as the son of a killer and the grandson of another killer with no way to know which story was true. So I made a harder choice. I walked away. Let Robert think he'd won. Let him live with his crimes, let them eat at him the way I knew they would. Let him drink himself to death slowly, year by year, drowning in guilt he'd never admit. And I built a plan that would outlast him. 70 years, long enough for him to die. Long enough for the statute of limitations to expire on everything. Long enough for my bloodline to come home to a gift he could never touch. I watched from a distance as Robert poisoned Marcus the same way he poisoned everything. I saw the boy grow into his father's shadow, hard and cold, and convinced that power was the only thing that mattered. I knew Marcus would eventually kill Robert. The pattern was written in their bones. Monsters create monsters. And I was right. Marcus gave Robert fentanyl in 1991, accelerating the liver failure that decades of drinking had earned. By then I was already gone. My work was done. The dead man's switch was set. The evidence waited. Some nights I wonder if I made the right choice. If I should have pulled that trigger in 1953, spent whatever years I had left in prison, and let the truth die with me. But then I think of you, of Charlie, of all the families the foundations will help, of Margaret finally getting proof that her brother David was murdered, of justice delayed but not denied. I didn't kill Robert Sterling William, but I made sure he didn't win. And watching from whatever comes after this life, seeing you turn tragedy into hope, seeing you build something good from the ruins we left behind, that's victory enough. The gun is in this desk drawer, by the way, unfired since 1945. I kept it all these years as a reminder. Violence is easy. Living with restraint, building something lasting, that's hard. You chose the hard path too. You fought clean through law and truth and light. I'm proud of you. Live well, love openly, build beautifully. Tell Michael's son, tell Charlie that his great-great-great-grandfather loved him across decades he'd never see. Tell him that good men make hard choices. Tell him that sometimes the bravest thing is walking away. Forever watching over you, Henry James Ashford, Corporal, 29th Infantry Division. April 3rd, 1953, P.S. I buried the compass rose seal with Eleanor. Seemed right that we should rest together, even if only in symbols. When you visit her grave, know that I'm there too, in every choice you make to be better than the evil that tried to break us. Bill sat for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. Henry hadn't been a murderer, he'd been something harder. A man who'd chosen restraint when violence would have been easier. A man who'd built a 70-year plan instead of seeking immediate revenge. Rebecca found him there an hour later. She read the letter over his shoulder, her hand resting on his neck. "What will you do?" she asked. "Think different than what we're already doing." Henry's letter just confirms what I suspected. He was a better man than I gave him credit for. He chose the long game. He chose justice over vengeance. "Will you tell Charlie?" Bill considered. "Yes, when he's a bit older, when he can understand the weight of it. Some truths need the right timing, but they all need telling eventually." He placed the letter in the safe beside Eleanor's locket and Henry's silver star. The past was finally complete, every secret revealed, every truth acknowledged. The foundation could be built on solid ground now, with no hidden faults waiting to crack and crumble. 5 years later, Bill stood on the manor's front porch watching Charlie graduate from high school. The boy was 17 now, taller than Bill, with Rebecca's calm intelligence and Bill's stubborn determination. He'd been accepted to Indiana University to study social work. In 4 years, he'd take over the foundation's operations. The legacy would continue into another generation. The foundation had helped 20,000 families in 5 years. It operated in 8 states, employed 40 people, and had become a national model for addressing generational poverty and veteran trauma. The manor's first floor was a museum now visited by 50,000 people annually, telling the story of forbidden love and delayed justice that had somehow, against all odds, ended in redemption. Bill was 65. His arthritis was worse despite the expensive treatments wealth could buy. But he was happy in a way he'd never imagined possible during those dark trailer park days. He had Rebecca, he had Charlie, he had purpose. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch as the sun set behind the restored garden. The fountain worked now, water sparkling in the fading light. Roses bloomed where Eleanor had once planted them. The house glowed with warmth and life. "Grandpa," Charlie said, "when I have kids someday, should I tell them the whole story, even the dark parts?" Bill thought about Henry's final letter about restraint and justice and the terrible choices people made when systems failed them. "Tell them everything," he said. "The love, the injustice, the restraint, the redemption. All of it. Truth is messy, but truth is what sets people free." Eleanor and Henry's story isn't just romance. It's about fighting for what's right, even when the cost is everything. It's about love that transcends death. It's about justice delayed but never denied. And it's about choosing the hard path, the path of building, rather than destroying. Charlie nodded, absorbing this wisdom the way he absorbed everything, storing it for future use. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. The manor's windows glowed golden. The foundation's sign stood at the gate, illuminated. Eleanor Ashford Foundation, breaking cycles since 2025. Somewhere in that house, in the vaults and the walls and the very foundation stones, Henry and Eleanor's love story lived on. Not as tragedy, though it had been tragic. Not as romance, though it had been romantic. But as transformation. As proof that even the deepest wounds could heal if you waited long enough, fought hard enough, believed strongly enough that justice would eventually arrive. Bill had been a desperate man, once broke and broken, raising his grandson in a trailer park, wondering how he'd survive the next month. That man felt like a stranger now. The inheritance had changed everything, yes. The money had solved problems money could solve. But the real inheritance wasn't the $900 million. It was the knowledge that he came from people who'd fought impossible battles and won. That Parker blood carried Henry's determination and Eleanor's courage. That even when the world seemed designed to crush working people into dust, resistance was possible. Victory was possible. Legacy was possible. As the stars emerged above the manor, the same stars Henry had painted on the tower room ceiling, 70 years ago, Bill felt the weight of all those generations. Henry and Eleanor. His father Michael, who died never knowing his real heritage. His son David, who died too young from demons he couldn't defeat. And Charlie, who would carry this story forward into whatever future waited. The past was gone, but not forgotten. The present was secure. The future was being built, one helped family at a time, one broken cycle at a time, one generation's wounds healed, so the next generation could start from higher ground. That was the real treasure Henry had hidden. Not money, though money helped. Not revenge, though justice had been served. But the understanding that love real, love the kind that sacrifices everything and expects nothing, could echo across decades and transform lives that hadn't even been lived when the first sacrifice was made. Bill reached for Rebecca's hand. She squeezed back her grip, strong and reassuring. Charlie sat between them, young and hopeful, and ready to carry this legacy forward. The manor stood behind them, no longer haunted by secrets, but alive with purpose. Every room had a story. Every vault had revealed its truth. Every mystery had been solved except the biggest one. How much good could one family do if given the resources and the will to try? They were still finding out. And Bill suspected they'd be finding out for generations to come.